Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. This is a historic edition of this podcast. This is the first time in the history of this show that anyone has ever come in from surfing to record the podcast. Chris Kamrani from The Athletic with us from Puerto Vallarta. You've had a morning session, right, Chris? There's more to come. Well, we had Chris. I think we lost Chris. That internet in Puerto Vallarta, Ari, is a little bit different thing. Ari Wasserman here with us, too.
I was not surfing this morning, Andy.
Yeah, neither was I. I took my son to the orthodontist office. He got his bottom braces on. He's not happy. But there will be milkshakes in his future.
Oh, well, man, I guess the good topic for this podcast should be what would you do for a milkshake? I think get braces would be fine. Our baby is sick for the second time in her life now, so that's not fun.
Are you less freaked out the second time than you were the first time?
Yeah, it's not being scared. It's almost just feeling bad that the baby can't get comfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to happen, and she's starting daycare in a few weeks, so we just got to condition ourselves to expect this to happen every now and then, and hopefully it'll be quick.
All right, Chris is back. We think we'll find out. Chris, you there?
I'm here.
Wow. This is the first time we've gone international on this podcast too.
Yeah,
and imagine if you would have chosen your restaurants last week, you wouldn't be able to go there.
I do bring an international flavor.
So, Chris, have you actually been in the waves this morning, or was last night too difficult to make that happen?
Too difficult to make it happen, but we're planning on getting there. I promise. All the listeners I know, everybody is deeply concerned about our ability to shred the waves.
I think they are, because they're just jealous right now. That they're like, dude, this guy just did an amazing story on the recruitments of Peyton Manning and Eli, what they mean for Arch Manning, and now he's just shredding tasty waves, brah. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, enough.
Is NAR snow? When you shred NAR, is that snow?
That's snow. Only snow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to how much surfer lingo can we?
Is that a cocaine reference?
You got to do this hand motion on this podcast at least 4 times today.
Is it the shaka, right?
And you got to go ee, right? You got to make that noise, ee.
for those who are just listening and not watching the YouTube channel, by the way, subscribe to the YouTube channel and subscribe to the podcast. You just get it, every way you can imagine. Ari is doing the shock.
Hang loose.
Hang loose.
The hang loose. Yeah, there's a name for it though, right? It's not the shocker, obviously. That is something else.
That's the Arizona State thing.
Right. But it's something like that. All right. We must speak about the topic at hand. Ari covers recruiting. Chris, as I mentioned,
it's called the Shaka sign, just so you know.
Shaka, there it is. I
thought you were going to say shocker, but it's Shaka.
I did say shocker. So, Chris last week published an amazing story about the recruitments of Peyton and Eli Manning. Chris, you reached out to me to get in touch with Steve Spurrier as you were doing this story, and the quote from Steve Spurrier about Peyton Manning's recruitment by Florida was all that I could have imagined it was. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you call and text the head ball coach, fully understanding that the odds of him getting back to you are very slim. And when he calls you back in like 3 hours and he's like, "What's up, good buddy? This is head coach Steve Spurrier." I was like, "Hello, Steve." It just kind of catches you off guard. It was very funny, and just, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, Andy, but like, he has this ability to kind of, I don't want to say pat himself on the back necessarily
every time
when he's just talking about anything, revisionist history, but he was just like, "Yeah, man, Peyton, we wanted that. We recruited the heck out of him," and getting all into that. And then he was just like listing all of these quarterbacks that obviously Florida was recruiting at the time.
Danny Werfel, Terry D.
In a roundabout way, just saying that Eric Kessler was the guy that he kept bringing up. They say they're real high on Eric Kessler.
Eric Kresser, Eric Kresser actually.
Kresser,
going to Marshall. and doing pretty well and played in the NFL for a while.
Yep.
So there you go.
Yeah,
That's
I
so
believe
funny.
he was throwing touchdowns to Randy Moss in West Virginia, so things work out for everybody. As Steve Spurrier said when it came to the recruitment of Peyton Manning, it was just funny, like getting into the Bermuda Triangle of Tennessee and Florida. I'd never been there before, and just hearing, kind of veiled shots between Steve Spurrier and Phil Fulmer about the recruitment of Peyton was really fascinating because Phil Fulmer's telling me this in-depth story about, the day he found out that Peyton was coming to UT, and, he eventually ends it with like, all I cared about was that Peyton didn't go to Florida. That's how it ended. So
But
it's like,
didn't Phil
I kind
Fulmer
of understand what that 90s rivalry was like.
didn't Philip Fulmer wake up the entire floor of a hotel in Pennsylvania when he found out Peyton Manning was coming to Tennessee?
Yeah, he was out there recruiting, and he guesstimated that it was at around 2 a.m. that he was informed that Peyton was going to commit to the Volunteers. And the way Philip explains the memory was that he gets the phone call and then just let out such a giant scream that people like did the movie thing where they open their hotel rooms just to look down the hallway to see if anything, kind of spooky is going on.
Oh yeah, and somebody probably shut up. Philip Fulmer, by the way, not given to massive emotional outbursts, so that tells you how important this was. But so Ari, you guys had a great conversation in one of our live rooms on the Athletic app last week, and you were taking reader questions on Chris's story and also on the recruitment of Arch Manning, because Chris's story kind of framed how the Arch Manning recruitment has been crafted. And really, they are trying to make it like the 90s recruitments of Peyton and Eli rather than a 21st century social media age recruitment, and done a fairly good job of it so far. But Ari, how amazed are you that they've been able to keep it as analog as they have?
I'm not amazed at all that they were able to accomplish don't talk to anybody, because
You
we've
could
seen
do
other
that.
we've seen other recruits do that before. But the thing that I'm most amazed about, and I said this on the live chat with Chris the other day, is that in talking to his head coach for the story that I wrote about him a few months ago, and then reading it again in Chris's much better story, they said that their number one goal for Arch is that he'll have a normal recruitment. And when they say normal recruitment, I think they are referring to what a normal recruitment resembled in like the 90s and the 80s.
Yeah.
Right now, he has a very abnormal recruitment as it pertains to the way things go nowadays. And I think that's pretty interesting. So, there's a lot of, undercurrents here when it comes to what stories you can come up with, especially considering the fact that he is, without question, probably the most marketable recruit that will ever come through high school ever. And we're only in year one of this thing because of just the quarterback position, the 5-star status, the fact that his uncles are two of the most marketable, figures in the history of advertising when it comes to football players. His last name, like, I don't think that you could go into a computer program or a studio or something and design a fake quarterback prospect that could be worth more in the NIL era than this guy is worth. And so when you say, are you surprised they've been able to keep it under wraps? No, I'm not surprised that they have been. What I am surprised by is that they're, and maybe I shouldn't be because they come from money and Peyton and Eli have made tons of it, but they have a prospect who is worth, if there's an $8 million man now, I can't imagine what Arch is actually worth. And, they haven't really succumbed to the temptation of, using all of that potential to not just earn money, but to raise his profile. So, maybe that in turn will raise it long term. But, it's just a very interesting dynamic. And I think it also is interesting in how he could possibly approach his career in college once he gets there. So, there's a lot of undertones to this recruitment that I think will be very interesting to watch play out.
Well, Chris, you mentioned it on the podcast that or on the live room that maybe the upbringing has a lot to do with the way this is being handled. Also, if we think about it, if it wasn't for a gambling entity, I mean, conceivably, once the rule changed, Arch could have been in the Caesar's Palace commercial with his uncles, his grandfather, and his dad. His dad's in those commercials too. So, I mean,
he's the only high school recruit that could be in a national commercial about anything. And I don't know that that'll ever happen again, unless, somebody else has a son or a grandson. But like Eli and Peyton are already in commercials. And like when you think about regular NFL quarterbacks, and I think we talked about this on the show, Andy, how many NFL starters right now do you see in national commercials? You see Aaron Rodgers, you see Pat Mahomes, Baker Mayfield's in that Progressive commercial, right, where he's in the stadium. But other than that, it's not like you see Jared Goff. You don't even see Joe
Matthew
Burrow.
Stafford got AT&T, but you're right. Joe Burrow, you're not even seeing Joe Burrow right now.
So if you don't see Joe Burrow, you could make a case that Arch Manning's name and his affiliation with Peyton and Eli makes him every bit as valuable as a National Football League starting quarterback, especially when they just played in the Super Bowl. Now, I don't know if he's worth more than Joe Burrow, and maybe that'll change in the next year. But man, like, put your thinking caps on here, guys. What kind of fake prospect could you create in the La La Land that would have a higher profile than this kid?
But Chris, I'm curious your take on this, because it seems to me like because of all this that he grew up around, like all of this is fairly normal to him. It doesn't seem like it's all that interesting to him.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There is, and Ari hit on this when we spoke in the live room. It's like he is absolutely the exception, not the rule. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the reality of the situation. It is fascinating to think that if he wanted to, Arch Manning could potentially make more money as a college football player from the NIL perspective as he potentially could from his first major NFL rookie contract. But that's a discussion for another time. But yeah, I mean, like pouring through all those old newspaper stories from the early 90s to mid 90s to late 90s, it's the Mannings do things the way they want to do them, and they're not going to basically bend over to the will of the way the nature of recruiting is going or how society's going to tell them how to act. And listen, the reality is not everybody is a very, the quarterback position demands an insane amount of, pressure, and you have to deliver. But not every quarterback is a guy, as you mentioned, who wants to be on State Farm or Progressive commercials. I understand that Arch is still a very young kid, but by talking to people around him for the story, he seems to just be a young man that wants to kind of experience each step of the blueprint once you kind of get to that college, that next step in college. And I think right now he's really leaning into the existence of being a high school kid. The same way Ari did with his story. I spoke with the Newman head coach, Nelson Stewart, and just, him talking about how when that video kind of went viral of Arch when he was in 8th grade, Cooper knew kind of the storm that was coming, and he told Nelson and basically everybody in the inner circle that he wants to be able to protect Arch from all of these mitigating factors out in the world that you don't necessarily have the ability to control. So, it's a long-winded way of saying that it is surprising in that it's unique, but it's also not surprising that if you knew the family and know how they have handled things like this in the past, high-profile recruiting battles in the past, this is just the next one in the long line. It's just different now because of the age of social media, because of the age of attention that this young man has compared to what his uncles or dad or grandfather have experienced during their, history in the game.
Do you guys know the NFL league minimum for salary for a 10-year veteran?
Oh, it's probably 2 million, 1.8 million,
1.12 million.
Oh wow, okay,
wow,
which is way which is a little bit. I mean, but like think about, being just a third stringer in the NFL for 10 years. You can make a good living, but like a 17-year-old kid is worth potentially 15 times as much annually right now. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just thought that.
Wait, you think he's worth $15 million a year right now?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not. I don't work at Open.
I don't think he's worth that much yet. But
how much do they pay somebody to be in a State Farm commercial?
Not that much. I mean, if you're the face of it, maybe if you are Mahomes, or if you are Rodgers, or you are the guy who plays Jake. What is the guy who plays Jake Command these days? Like, he's on my TV more than anybody else. But all right, let's talk about Arch the player, because it occurred to me. Now I realize most of our listeners are sickos like us who follow this stuff in every, the little detail. Arch Manning is the son of Cooper Manning. Cooper Manning is the oldest of Archie and Olivia Manning's sons. So his younger brothers are Peyton and Eli. Cooper was Peyton's top receiver when they were in high school. Cooper, probably the best pure athlete of those three brothers. He was going to be a receiver at Ole Miss. He had a neck injury that ended up ending his career. But Arch is his son. So, the genes, very strong. You've watched him, a ton of Arch Manning video by this point. What is he like as a quarterback?
Yeah, I think that if you just put together what his last name is and try to put into your head what he is, smart and dependable and can read defenses and makes plays and keeps his head on a swivel and all the other football cliches you can come up with. But the thing that really stood out to me about his tape, and I'm by no means an NFL GM who can break down talent as well as some of the guys over at 247, but what I see is insane athleticism from a just pure ability standpoint. And I don't think people associate Eli and Peyton with that ability in terms of those guys were just solid, steady, amazing NFL quarterbacks, but they never did anything physically that wowed people. And I think that Arch Manning does that. And what I've always said is, go watch him play basketball. He's dunking the ball. He's got viral videos. He's a very, very good athlete. I think he's sneaky fast. He's big. He's got a strong arm and everything that you want as a five-star quarterback. And there's no question in my mind that if his last name was different, that he would be a five-star quarterback. Now, the thing that I think is most interesting about this recruitment is that every single team, or the three that seem to be standing out right now, and I know that you predicted that Florida was going to land him in one of your crazy predictions.
That was a hot take. That was
an Ari Blazer right there.
I haven't given up on the old alma mater in that situation yet, but they are not in his top three at the moment.
So the top three right now, if you've been living under a rock, is Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. And it's not a formal top three. It's just the ones that everybody assumes is top three. What do those three?
He's not calling up Hayes Fawcett, who we've had on this podcast before, to get a graphic with his
No,
top
he's not
12.
doing any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But what are those three teams have in common? All of them have a five-star quarterback who has recently signed on the roster. Ty Simpson at Alabama, Quinn Ewers at Texas, and Georgia's got a few as well.
There's also the five-star from Alabama
that's starting
the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, but I think that's another alternate discussion that I'd like to have on this podcast before it's over too, about the expectation for five-star quarterbacks to play early and how Arch's approach to his recruitment might mean more patience than you typically get from a recruit too, because he's not in a position to need everything right now. In terms of waiting when he gets there, because if he goes to Georgia, Texas, or Alabama, I know for a fact that Nick Saban's sales pitch isn't come here right now and start year one. Who
never has been. No.
So, and maybe it won't be Alabama in the end, but the thing that I think is most fascinating about him, Andy and Chris, is that because he doesn't do very many interviews with the media, and when he does the same generic, here's who I'm considering, here's where I want to visit, here's what I like about every school, interviews that are very bland and not interesting, is that we don't really know exactly what the kid wants. What does he crave for himself? Does he want to go to a place that's already established and has won national titles and will all but surely develop him into a first-round pick? That's Alabama. Does he want to go to Georgia and be the extension of what Georgia is building, which is to be the five-star quarterback that turns Georgia into Alabama? Or does he want to go to Texas and save the jokes, but make Texas return, make Texas back? It's these are all very different places, even though they all, have five-star quarterbacks on the roster. So, until somebody has a frank conversation with Arch himself about what he wants and what he desires, it's very hard to kind of come up with what what you should view. So, he's not going to, release a top 5. So the best thing that we can do is track his movements, see where he's visiting, and put a lot of stock into his actions, because his actions are certainly going to be speaking louder than his words as it pertains to his recruitment.
So, Chris, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the differences between Arch's recruitment and the Peyton Eli recruitments, because the thing that fascinated me, and I didn't know any of this because I was in high school. I'm a little bit younger than Peyton and a little bit older than Eli. I didn't know that Archie was essentially their press secretary, that he'd talk to anybody who called, and that there was actually a decent amount of information flowing out of there until sounds like the end of Peyton's recruitment, where Peyton basically shut it down, and they went to the Hilton Riverside Hotel to get away from everybody bothering them at the house, and Peyton, tried to make a decision. But it does seem like Archie was so involved there, and that's almost quaint. Like, I can't even imagine now, like, if Cooper Manning was like, yeah, I'll talk to whoever. Nope, I think we may have lost Chris.
Yeah, it's
Nope, you're here.
It is a trip, to say the least. Okay, sorry guys. I was saying it's a trip, to say the least, to go back and pore over old newspaper stories over 30 years and just have staff photographers be invited into the Manning household in the Garden District, and just like taking photos of Archie and Peyton on the phone with coaches. But what's even more interesting is that you read the stories, you talk to people who covered recruiting back then. They just did an exceptional job of feeding the beast to a certain point. They never ever overfed anybody. They were transparent about which teams were involved and where they were going, but they never told anybody about a potential lean. They never said that this school stands out more so than the other because we like X, Y, or Z. And those parallels with Peyton and Eli ring just as true now with Arch. Because I understand in this social media era, you can take any nugget, any grain of information, and spin it forward into a quote unquote scoop, or Twitter scoop, or lean. I can say substantially and comfortably that the Mannings, Arch, they will not be leaking anything about where he's leaning or what he wants to do before he makes that decision. That's just the reality of the situation. And I said, don't be surprised if this thing goes all the way to early signing day in December or signing day next February. They don't feel any external pressure to get this thing done. They're going to do this on their own timeline, the same way they did with Peyton almost 30 years ago, and the same way they did with Eli 25 years ago. It's just different now. Now, as you said, Andy, Cooper is not the press secretary. He's not Arch's SID. He doesn't need to set up these types of interviews with people from all over the country who fly into New Orleans to do these big takeouts, because back then coaches were getting newspapers delivered to their desk. They were getting all of the information that the rest of the nation was getting in real time by reading these stories. Now information is faster than light, and it can hit your phone whenever. So that is the reality of what Arch is facing now, and the past of the Mannings understanding that they have total control of the way they want to do this.
I just, it is amazing to me, the level of control and the understanding. Now, if you've ever met Archie Manning, I've met him a couple times. He's so smart. He understands what our job is, and he's just also a very nice person. So I get exactly how he could wind up being that guy who does give everybody kind of what they need, but maybe not necessarily what they want. And so, yeah, the lack of a tip at all here is interesting. And Ari, you brought up something interesting on the live room. Even though Arch Manning is not saying much publicly, he's very much in the group texts of all the best players in the class of 2023. So you could see a serious Pied Piper effect from Arch Manning.
Yeah. I think that I've talked to at least 10 recruits since the beginning of the cycle who have mentioned in passing that they have communicated with Arch in either a personal text or a group text. And those 10 recruits were all very good. So I think there's the sentiment that because he isn't doing a ton of interviews and he's not maybe not going to go to the Elite 11 and all the other stuff that you would get, that he is kind of off in his own world, but he's still very much social and a part of these recruitments and stuff like that. And this is what I've always said too. If you look back at what the programs that he's currently most, or at least apparently most considering, you could make a case that none of them truly need his skill set. I mean, they all have very good quarterbacks.
Texas does.
Yeah, I guess Texas does until Quinn Ewers proves that he is. If you can have some doubt, if he is good enough to lead the program back. Anyway, everybody always wants and needs, I guess, a 5-star quarterback in every class. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be helpful for all three of those places, particularly Texas. But what I think his commitment would mean from a symbolic standpoint for that program to say, hey, you know what? We have the most high-profile recruit in the history of recruiting choosing our school. What does that say about who we are and what he believes we're headed toward? And that's a very powerful message and a very powerful sales pitch to other elite level prospects who are considering your school. And obviously Alabama and Georgia don't necessarily need the help. They're already at that level. But if he goes to Texas, which I think, I guess if we were, guns to head right now, we'd probably have to say Texas because it seems like that's where he's leaning on the internet sleuth list. But if he ended up at Texas, I think that would be a huge coup for them in terms of what it means in the state of Texas and recruiting against A&M and all the things that go along with it. So certainly think that this recruitment is high profile because of his last name and the ability that he has at the quarterback position. I'm not trying to diminish that.
So, but Chris, why not Tennessee or Ole Miss? It feels like they were eliminated fairly early for, was it a blaze my own path kind of thing?
Yeah, it's absolutely a blaze my own path type of approach, and that's totally fine. Oddly enough, his uncles did it. Peyton did it by not wanting to go to Ole Miss for a bevy of reasons. First and foremost, Ole Miss was in a very difficult spot back then. For people who don't know, the program was in shambles. There were sanctions, levied by the NCAA. It just wasn't a program where he could go and star and be successful. And conversely, Tennessee was on the uptick. Philip Fulmer and that staff were, trending northward towards title contention and eventually being a championship level team. And then you flip the script with Eli. He follows his old man's path and then simultaneously decides to chart his own path by not following Eli to Tennessee, which makes me think, based on what Ari just said, like there's a total realistic scenario that I think Arch throws a curveball in this whole thing. And by curveball, I say I think if we're trusting the internet sleuths, like Texas, I think would be like an ultimate coup for Steve Sarkisian in that program. I think the task of being the face of a quote unquote, turnaround job is a lot for a young man, but the Mannings have always made it clear that they're always going to do what's best for the individual. And it's interesting that you brought up kind of being able to go out and be on those group chats with people. There are parallels based on, working on the story as well. Like Philip Fulmer said, as soon as Peyton called him that night to tell him he was coming, Peyton said, all right, well, I'm going to get on the phone with some other guys across the country to try to get them to Knoxville. And I know that's not breaking news. That's not like totally out of the realm of like the reality of recruiting, but there is precedent here and there is similarities between, what happened 30 years ago and what happened now. And as both of you have stated, like the Manning word has sway with people across the country, especially in football.
The difference for Peyton is the other players had to be home when he called because it was all landlines, baby. This is a totally different world now. But what Chris just said, Ari, I'm curious about because the Manning word, like the Manning name is massive in the sport of football. We always talk about, oh, these kids weren't born yet when this happened. I guarantee you every member of the class of 2023 respects Peyton or Eli Manning because they've seen them on TV. They've seen them win Super Bowls. Like that will ring, pretty heavy with them would be my guess.
Yeah. I also think too, that there's a difference between remembering how good a team was in 1996 and knowing that a person's last name has made them incredibly famous and rich. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I don't think that the message always is, did you see how good Peyton Manning was at football? I think the message is Peyton Manning was good enough at football to become a broadcaster and be in national televisions, an NFL legend, and now is very, very wealthy, which is what everybody wants. So, I think too that people get so bogged down with how long ago was it, and I think that each individual thing that they're remembering is different. And it would be much different if these guys were very good 10, 15 years ago and then disappeared, but they're very much they got their own telecast during, primetime football games.
They're still on commercials. They're on more commercials than most current NFL starting quarterbacks. Yeah.
And like Peyton is like legitimately funny. Like
Eli is too. This is Sports Center they did with Archie is the best one where Peyton's kicking Eli in the butt behind Archie's. It was amazing.
Yeah. Those commercials were the best commercials ever.
Yes. Agreed.
I thought the one where Scott Van Pelt was using performance-enhancing drugs during the steroid era, and then they came to his desk and he was using big words on the air, and then they found a thesaurus in his drawer and he ran. That one's my favorite.
When he steals LeBron's chair is pretty good too.
Yeah. Good luck finding your chair, LeBron. But what were we talking about? Just how much of a sales pitch?
Peyton is? Just what a Manning calling you and saying, "Hey, come play with me" means.
Yeah. I was doing a New York Times crossword puzzle because I do them every day. That's a new fun fact.
Highbrow.
I'm very bad.
Shout out to our new corporate overlords.
No, yeah. Well, I just do it just to see how good I can do, and I can solve the Monday ones and everything else, no shot. But one of the clues in one of the crossword puzzles was football's first family, and the answer was Manning. Like, I think that it is.
That's it.
And it's just like, okay. It is what it is. So, very curious to see. But I looked up two things while you guys were talking. I want you to know that Jake from State Farm, the new one, makes $15,000 a commercial.
Oh, we got to do better than that. His agent needs to be fired.
He does a lot of commercials, but that's not a lot.
He's got to get residuals on that.
But
there's got to be mailbox money involved.
Flo from Progressive makes $1 million a year. And I don't know what makes her so marketable. I find her.
What about the AT&T lady that everybody loves so much?
The AT&T lady, I'll figure out how much she makes. But I wanted to make another joke about Arch since we're talking about, and I want to go back and recall last week because I was very, very annoyed by how few people thought I won last week in the restaurant draft.
I was shocked that anybody thought I won.
I don't think people grasped what we were doing, and it frustrates me. But I was watching CNBC this morning because my money's on fire, and I was there. Speaking of Archie, the Golden Arches are coming out of Russia now, so I can never go to Russia.
Well, that may change. That situation seems somewhat fluid, so that may change. But you did guarantee yourself the most international travel with McDonald's. Now, I got some international travel with Ruth's Chris. I just have to stay in some pretty nice places.
Yeah, you'll be okay.
Chris, no Chipotles or Cracker Barrels in Puerto Vallarta, right?
None that I can see so far, but there was a TGI Fridays that is somehow still going when we were driving from the airport.
Let's redraft.
Can you just apologize on behalf of the rest of America to the locals for that one?
I will. Also, I'll apologize to everyone on this podcast and all the listeners because I worked at TGI Fridays when I was in college. So,
listen,
everybody, buck, but it is interesting to drive by. They just don't exist anymore. The one place that I know will always have TGI Fridays is that one by the Arch in St. Louis because it looks like they built it to attract people coming into Vegas. I think that's St. Louis's Vegas.
So
it's
basically
TGI Fridays.
The end of the rainbow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
TGI Fridays has this burger that has a fried cheese patty on the burger.
That's a thing now. The
I used
fried
to get
cheese
that.
medallion.
I used to get that in college.
Yeah, that and it's become more of a thing now. People will do fried goat cheese as kind of an elevated take on it. But yeah, it's now a thing at your fancy burger places too. So TGI Friday's way ahead of its time. Pour one out for Bennigan's in this discussion. I miss Bennigan's. Miss you, Monte Cristo.
I thought I saw a Bennigan's because I drove back from LA to Texas, and I think I drove by one somewhere.
There are a few there's a company that has revived Bennigan's and Steak and Ale. I can't remember which company that is, but somebody bought them up or bought the names, bought the IP, and has revived it. And I believe you can actually, where they have them, you can get the Steak and Ale menu items and the Bennigan's menu items.
There's a few in middle of nowhere,
place.
Texas. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Monahan's, Texas. I stayed there.
There you go.
It's an oil town. Yeah, I should have gone.
Monahan's, Texas is where Sonny Dykes started his coaching career. For those who don't know, assistant baseball coach at Monahan's High School.
Holy cow! That's
it is nothing but oil drills. What are those called?
Pump jacks.
Pump jacks. So I should know that because half my male friends here in Texas,
they call them nodding donkeys. Like there's a bar in Dallas called the Nodding Donkey.
I still would like to walk up to one and see how they work because I'm fascinated by it. Is that a weird thing?
I think it'd get messy, but yeah.
No, I wouldn't mind go down into the thing. I just don't understand what it's doing.
Oh, we're veering dangerously toward reading Ari's Google search history portion.
You don't want to read it right now. I don't.
Censored.
We'll
I mean, it out.
You want me to read it out?
Yes.
Hang loose hand signal. 15 racks, which is what I was trying to figure out, how much money that was, because that's how much the dude from State Farm makes. Nike Air Sakai, which is a shoe that I want. Bennigan's locations. I did a lot of NFL league minimum. It's not that funny this time. But one is fundamental Mormonism, which I'm reading a book about.
We're not ready, Ari. We're not ready for this.
Yeah, no, I didn't know if we could get through 2 live
Chris
rooms.
lives in Utah. He probably knows much more about this than us.
Chris got me on a podcast, and I'm reading Under the Banner of Heaven right now.
Oh, okay.
So that's part of it. But that would have been a funny one to lead off with there. Next week, when we have to do it at the beginning of the show because I Google a lot of stuff during the show.
This is tremendous. We will do that next week. Chris, we got to let you go. There are waves to catch. There is tequila to drink. Hopefully there are fresh made tortillas in your future. But thank you so much for taking time out of the surf trip to talk to us.
A true pro with the pros.
Gentlemen, I appreciate you, and I cannot wait to retweet this to the masses because I know everybody is very concerned about the amount of tequila and tortillas I will be consuming.
Well, I'm concerned because I just want tequila and tortillas right now.
He's already got a beautiful tan too, so he's gonna come back feeling good, tan, rested, and ready.
I can't wait. Everybody, thank you so much. On Wednesday's show, Teddy Greenstein, author of QB Dads. We're gonna talk Caleb Williams at USC, Brock Vandegrift at Georgia, and many, many other QBs and their dads who, they're usually fairly involved. So we're going to talk about that when we return on Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, leave a nice review. Subscribe to the podcast. You don't have to worry about downloading. It'll just download for you. And go to YouTube and smash that subscribe button too. We'll talk to you later.